Hey there! Probably the most of you experienced the problem when binding an FrSky receiver to an FrSky transmitter. At the moment I'm building a new quad for my wife and she will get my old Taranis X Lite and fly with this new quad. In this video I show you my whole procedure when I'm dealing with FrSky equipment. So from flashing to binding and also the single steps done in Betaflight to get this work. I'm gonna start to flash the internal module. One hint at this point: when you flash the internal module of your Taranis transmitter, then you have to rebind all of your quads. So when you only have problem with one new quad, then it's probably better to flash the right firmware to the receiver of this new quad instead of doing the whole thing and flashing the internal module. But enough of talking, let's go! So first of all, we plug in a SD card into the computer, and in my case you can see that I've already prepared the SD card. But in case you haven't done this already, I show you how to do it. So you go to FrSky-rc.com and then you search for your transmitter. In my case I'm using a Taranis X Lite, so I'm going to the Taranis series and then I see the Taranis X Lite. When you now scroll to the bottom of the page, you can see the SD card contents, and there are two different files. As far as I know, the only difference is that the smaller file only includes the English language packages, but the bigger file includes as well other languages like German, Turkey, Russian, so whatever. So in case you don't want to hear "Welcome to OpenTX" and you want to hear instead "Willkommen zu OpenTX", then you should download the bigger zip package. And in case you do so, only make sure that you put the right language on the SD card and not all the other languages. But now, after we prepared the SD card, we want to go further and flash all the modules and receivers we have. So we start with the internal module of our transmitter, so the IXJT module we have in our transmitter. When you have several quads, just be sure when you flash the internal module of the transmitter that you have to rebind and reflash all the other quads. So if you have several quads bound already, then you can skip the step and search for the right firmware for your quad. But back to topic. So we get the ACCST D16 version, and as I'm living in Germany, we have to make sure that I'm only allowed to use D16, and if you live in other countries, just make sure that you're running the right firmware and don't get in trouble. And European countries have to use LBT, so listen before talk. So when you live in the US, you can flash FCC to your transmitter. So we put it on the SD card and then we go for the next step for the RXSR. So we're going back to the download page and then we're searching for the RXSR. So here you can see the RXSR, and now we want to download the exact firmware that we have downloaded for the internal module already. So in our case ACCST D16, and we are using S-Bus in this video, so you can use F-port as well, but in this video I will show you how to use S-Bus, as it is pretty fiddly to solder up a cable to the F-port, and therefore I won't show you this in this video. And I think the most of you will use S-Bus as well. So now we're going to download this version also to our SD card. And now we just have to make sure that we use the same version as we have for the internal module. So if you use listen before talk, then put this on there, and if you use FCC, then put this on your SD card. After we prepared the firmware for these both, I will as well download the firmware for the XM Plus. To find the XM Plus, you have to go to the 2.4 GHz ACCST, and there you can see the XM Plus already. And now that we're here, we're scrolling down, and then we download the firmware for the ACCST D16 as well for the XM Plus. I'm going to download the firmware with the 2.1.0 and not the 2.1.2, as I had several problems when speaking from the internal module to this firmware. Now we just repeat the step and download the file and also put it on our SD card. Just make sure that you put the right firmware, so LBT in my case, and then we're done with all these steps for the SD card. And now we have prepared everything and we can unplug the SD card from the computer and start with the funny things to flash the receivers. So we take out the SD card from the computer and plug it into our transmitter. After that you power on your transmitter, and then we have to go to the menu for the firmware. On the Taranis X Lite you have to long press the joystick to the left side, and then you could jump to the several menus. As you can see here, we're now in the menu for the SD card contents, and there we have the firmware folder. In order to flash the internal module, we have to find the right firmware, long press, and then select flash internal module and long press again. Then it starts flashing. And as I said before, if you only want to bind one quad and all your other quads are bound already, then you shouldn't flash the internal module, as you have to re-flash or rebind the old quads again. I did it in my case so that I know which firmware I have to flash for new quads. From that moment I sped up the video, so don't be afraid that it will take longer on your device. When it's done with the flashing, you should see a flash successful and everything is okay. So we successfully flashed our internal module. And now we go on to the RXSR. So typically in the package of the RXSR is this cable. So this cable we are using for the flashing now. We plug it into the Taranis X Lite, and there's only one way to plug it, and then you have to plug in the RXSR as well. After you've connected the RXSR to your transmitter, you have to go to the menu for the SD card contents again. So you have to search for the firmware that you have for the RXSR and long press and then flash S port. So external module won't work, you have to use S port. And when everything is going okay, you will see that it is blinking, and now we have to wait again. And after the flash is successful, you will see flash successful, and we're done with the RXSR also. And now we're going to flash the XM Plus. As the XM Plus neither has a connector for wires nor some wires into the box like we have with the XM Plus, we have to solder up some wires and connect it to the transmitter. This isn't a huge deal, but comparing to the RXSR, it's a little bit more effort. So I'm using jumper cables for this task. Jumper cables have the advantage that we can connect it to the transmitter right away, and we don't have to use any connectors or something else. But now we just solder up everything. After we're done, it should look like this. So the solder joints don't have to be super pretty, but you just have to make sure that they don't connect each other. After we're sure we haven't shorted anything, we can plug it into our transmitter. And in my case you can see the RXSR wire again, and I'm following the same color, so I have to plug it in like that. So you have from left to right the signal cable, the 5-volt cable and the ground cable. After we've connected everything to our transmitter, we have to select the firmware again, and our receiver will start blinking again. And after we're done, and now we're just waiting to get the flash done, and as always you will see a flash successful, and you just have to hit OK on the screen to get away from the menu. After we're done, you can unsolder the wires, and now I'm going to show you the bind procedure with the RXSR, but the procedure is basically the same with the XM Plus. With the RXSR you will get also this cable, and from that cable you don't have to use all of the wires or the pins, and therefore we put the unnecessary wires out. So I'm having a wiring diagram from my flight controller, and as you can see, we will use for the RXSR the ground, the 5 volt and the S bus. So we don't need the S bus in, and we don't need the S port. So now we remove these unnecessary wires from the connector, and I show you how to do it. So when we have a look at the connector, we need those 2 cables, then the green wire and the other both can go out. So we take out the white wire and the yellow wire. For this task I'm using little tweezers to lift the plastic lid and then pull the wires out. As soon as I've taken out the unnecessary wires, I'm pushing the plastic lids with the tweezers so that all wires are fit and tight in there. Right now I'm not sure how to put the RXSR in the frame, so I only show you the way how to connect it and to bind it, but I won't cut it to the right length now. So now we're looking at the wiring diagram and have a look what we have to connect. So we need our ground, our 5 volts and the S bus. So now I'll solder up everything, and after that it looks like this. So as you can see, I connected the RXSR already. So I'm using a smoke stopper now, as I have loose components and I don't want to fry anything when I'm wiggling around with the components and accidentally short anything. So here you can see the RXSR is blinking red and the blue light is solid, so this means it's in S-bus mode, so we can bind it now. In order to bind it, I'm using these tweezers which are closing automatically, so I don't have to push the bind button all the time. Because in this procedure we have to push the bind button while we're plugging in a LiPo, and I guess most of you don't have 4 hands. To go to the menu you have to long press the joystick to the right 2 times and then go 1 up, and there you can see bind already. So you hit that and then you select channel 1 to 8 and telemetry on. You can also use 1 to 16, but the latency is a little bit higher and you don't really use that many channels on a quad. As soon as the transmitter is into bind mode, you will hear a light beep, and in order to flash now, you should put the transmitter about 1 to 2 meters away, as there are sometimes some problems with linking together in FrSky. If you prepared the RXSR like me with the tweezers, you have to push the bind button all the time now, or you search for another person who can push the bind button and you can plug in a LiPo. Now when everything is ready and set up, you will see a solid green light and a fast red blinking light, so this means everything was successful. Now we can remove the LiPo and the tweezers and put our transmitter back into normal mode by pushing back once. If you replug the LiPo now, you should see a green light and everything should work right away. So now we're done with the binding procedure, and now we're heading to Betaflight to set everything up to get the quad ready. So in Betaflight, the first thing we want to do is to go to the ports tab and make sure that the transmitter is speaking to the quad. In the ports tab you can see that there is no serial RX selected, so this is necessary for the connection between the transmitter and the quad. In this case I use the same UARTs as shown in the wiring diagram, and therefore you can see UART 1 is S-bus and I will select serial RX on the UART 1. So you can only click this one and then go to save and reboot. So after that is done, it will reboot and we will go to the configuration tab. In the configuration tab, we have to make sure that we have selected here serial based receiver, S-Bus and S-Bus here as well. As we're using our RXSR, we use telemetry, so telemetry is used when the quad wants to send data to the transmitter, for example if you want to read out your battery voltage. And last not least, we have to make sure that everything is connected all right with the transmitter. So in the most of the cases you have to plug in a LiPo so that the receiver is powered on, and as you can see here in the bottom right corner, my quad is doing the things that I ordered to. So when I roll, it rolls, when I yaw, it yaws, and when I flip, it flips, and so on. And I also want to make sure that all the switches are working, so you can see AUX 1, 2, 4, that everything is working correctly. In case that your quad is spinning like crazy in the bottom right corner, then you should have a look at the channel map. So you want to make sure that AETR is selected and not TAER, for example. And this depends on the things you have set up in your transmitter. So when you have the channel output for AETR, for example, then you should select it here as well. And you can see when I change it now to a different channel map, then the quad will spin like crazy and you won't fly with that quad because it will think that, for example, the throttle is all the way up and it won't arm and you can't fly with that quad. So when I'm changing this, and you will have the same picture here, then you should try to change the channel map, and in some cases this will work and your problem will be solved right away only by changing this. As I only did this for demonstration purposes, I will select AETR again, and then we're done with Betaflight and done with this short video about FrSky binding. And as always, if you didn't like the video, don't tell anybody how you spent the last minutes. But if I helped you, I'm happy if you leave a like and subscribe, and stay tuned for upcoming videos. I'm posting at least one video a week to get more beginners into this great hobby. So, stay tuned and see you next time. So, ich weiß jetzt nicht, wie lange er aufgenommen hat oder ob er überhaupt aufgenommen hat. Falls er nicht aufgenommen hat, hasse ich diese Kamera ab jetzt. Naja. Zur Not brauchen wir anderen Ton. Scheißdreck. Okay.